Greetings, comrades. This is a quick improvised response to a video posted on Russia Today yesterday called Sharia Law Battlefield London. And it centres around Anjem Choudry and his new organisation, Muslims Against Crusades. If you're unfamiliar with Anjem Choudry, he's a British-born Muslim extremist. He's founded many other organisations which were banned by the government. His current one is not. And yeah, he calls for Sharia law in Britain. He's been known to help militant Islamists travel from Britain to Afghanistan and Pakistan to fight against NATO forces. And yeah, he's just generally a bit of a dick. His new group has started a poster campaign around Walthamstow, which is a borough of London. And what they're basically doing is they're putting up posters which say you're entering a Sharia-controlled zone, and it shows some laws, some rules that people are supposed to follow according to him in these areas, including no dancing, no gambling, etc., etc. Now, I think the woman in this video towards the end made a very good point in that this move is particularly a divisive and a polarising kind of move in an attempt to woo moderate Muslims towards the extremist side by creating antagonism between Muslims and non-Muslims. I personally do not think this will work particularly well because I'm pretty sure the BNP and the EDL have tried similar things, and it's too, there's always like a small percentage that will turn to a more extreme side on both the Muslim and non-Muslim side, but if this man is trying to start some kind of a race war or religious-based war, I don't think that will work particularly well. Not in Britain, anyway. Politics in Britain are usually extremely moderate. Things like extreme Islam and extreme nationalism are quite new developments within the last 5 or 6 years, I would say. And I think that's partly why even the British Union, the fascists and the National Front weren't I wouldn't consider them to be mass movements. They didn't have huge mass support, and that's also probably why there haven't been huge numbers of communists either. It's a very moderate country politically. Now, there seems to be a misconception, especially in the wake of Anders Breivik's propaganda about Marxists, that people on the left are supportive of Islamic law and, kind of tolerant of religious extremism. And I feel this is completely untrue. I think it boils down to often Marxists and Islamists tend to come to similar conclusions on many issues and have mutual opponents politically. But that's just, I think, I read somewhere that, someone said that Islamism has much of the same appeal that communism did in the last century, and I think there's probably some kind of truth in that for the alienated young soul. But Marxism is an atheistic philosophy. It's basically based on the idea of science and the idea that ideologies that are based on what we call idealism, i.e. non-physical ideas that aren't based on science or rooted in science, are illegitimate. And dialectical materialism, which is the underlying philosophy of Marxism, is the only one that's really in the interest of the working class because it's based on real things and not fantasies or abstract morality. I personally, I have comrades who probably would call for the forceful destruction of religion. I personally believe in a secular society, in the complete separation of church from state, but the freedom to practice your religion in your private life, as long as it does not influence political decisions or economic decisions or anything like that. Basically, just keeping things completely separate. If you actually look at the number of countries that have really tried to enforce harsh Sharia law, they only seem to be able to stick for any period of time if they have a lot of oil which they can buy support or protection with. Afghanistan is probably one of the best known examples under the Taliban, and it was, I don't need to tell anybody what kind of a state Afghanistan was under the Taliban. Needless to say, it was pretty terrible. But from a kind of philosophical standpoint, when you try and enforce any kind of totalitarian ideology upon any large population, you can never get 100% of people to agree with it. That's why you've had resistance of varying degrees in Iran, and to a much less degree, I must say, in Saudi Arabia. But you try and any attempt to, especially in a very kind of multicultural but mostly secular nation like Britain, any attempt to try and enforce a religious totalitarianism will just lead to polarizing society, and it won't achieve any of its aims. Unless its aims are just to create conflict, and the lines would be drawn ethnically rather than religiously, because people will attack anyone they perceive to be on the other side, and that, in the case of Muslims, that could include Hindus, Sikhs, basically anyone who's not of the indigenous skin colour, and of course for any kind of young alienated Islamist, any kind of white person who may or may not have anything to do with the argument, or may not even have an opinion on the argument. But it goes both ways. Any attempt to enforce atheist totalitarianism creates, from my understanding of history, even more conflict and even more strife. The Soviet Union attempted to do it, and in some cases it led to kind of insurgency. It caused a lot of people, especially in the Civil War, who were of a religious background, to go and join the White Armies as opposed to the Red Army. Led to insurgencies in some of the heavily Muslim areas of the USSR, of which there were many. Countries like Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Chechnya, of course, is a good example. Many of those countries had large Muslim populations, and it kind of led to a sense of division, to the extent where Stalin actually had to allow people to practice their religion during the Second World War in order to get the morale needed to carry on the war effort. Another example is China, where there, especially in the early stages of the Civil War, there were Muslim insurgencies fighting on the side of Chiang Kai-shek, anyway, the Kuomintang. And even today, there's a very low-level insurgency in the Xinjiang region from what they call the Islamic Organization of East Turkestan. They're separatists. They want to create some kind of an Islamic state. In the heavily Uyghur-populated areas, Uyghurs are an ethnicity found in China, and are usually quite heavily Muslim. Now, so you've got any kind of attempt to enforce totalitarianism on a personal level will just lead to violence and aggression and disunity. I believe the workers' movement should be a very inclusive kind of a movement. While we want people to ideally stand for the same kind of principles and back policies for the greater social benefit of the wider population, to the extent where we try and control people's thoughts, again, that will just cause people to turn away and join, the other side. Uh, so in this video, there's another small segment where they talk about the possible enforcements of these laws, and he says they've got bands of young Muslims who are willing to go about and take vigilante action in order to enforce these laws. And another guy on the video says something to the effect of, well, at first, it would just be kind of verbal kind of arguments. But he alludes to the use of physical force. And for me, let's take an example. You've got just an ordinary English woman dressed as ordinary women do in secular Western societies, walking down the street, and she's hassled because she hasn't got her hair covered. This is an attack on somebody just minding their own business, going about their daily routine, because their ordinary life doesn't match the morality of this aggressive person. And I feel this is actually quite similar to when you get extreme evangelical Christians protesting outside abortion clinics and harassing women going into them. I'm not saying that having an abortion or just walking around with your hair uncovered is obviously the same thing to me, but basically it's the idea of being harassed because of this person's own religious and moral principles as they go about their daily business. And of course, should that enforcement of Sharia law lead to any kind of a violence, then again that could be compared to the blowing up of abortion clinics. Basically, what I'm saying, I'm not saying that these things are equal in terms of whether they're good or bad, but what I'm saying is it's the philosophical idea underlying these actions of trying to enforce your own religious morals upon someone else who may not share those morals. And in a secular society, I'd say Britain is 90% secular. We do have an official state church, but it doesn't affect our daily lives that much. But in a mostly secular society, this kind of behaviour is completely unacceptable. And as I said, it will cause a polarisation between Muslims and non-Muslims, which could potentially lead to some kind of violence. I don't think it's going to start a race war anytime soon, but I think there will be a few extra attacks here and there, a few protests that will get a bit out of control, and for what? Both of these sides, the ultra-nationalists in Britain and these ultra-Islamic people, they're two sides of the same coin to me. I view them both as far-right extremist movements, and both very much a threat to the working class, whose ideologies are not in the interest of the working class. So therefore I kind of oppose both sides on the argument, and I say communism! So let's kind of look to the future. Let's throw up a hypothetical and say they do manage to trying to enforce that religious laws, or trying to kind of commit pogroms against Muslims on both sides of this argument. This is why, especially my party, which is the Communist Party of Great Britain Provisional Central Committee, calls for the right to bear arms. I know a lot of people on the right would be surprised that a left-wing group would call for the right to bear arms, but yeah, we do. The working class needs to be able to defend itself. It doesn't need protection from a paramilitary group. It doesn't need protection from the state. It needs to be able to protect itself from things that could potentially destabilise society, like these divisive campaigns. I'll go into more detail about the whole rights to bear arms thing another time, but basically it's all bullshit, man. Fuck. He grew up in like Welling or some shit, I doubt this guy's even lived in Saudi Arabia or Iran. I doubt he knows what the fuck he's talking about. You might say the same thing about me. I've never lived in the Soviet Union or something, but note that I do not consider the Soviet Union or the People's Republic of China or most other communist countries to be good examples, and if I were in charge, they aren't the kind of thing that I try and do. So what are your thoughts on the so-called Islamization of Britain, or the far-right movement in Britain? If you have an opinion, leave a comment or send me a message or whatever. So take care. Bye.